If somebody were to come up and ask me, Kyle, do you think we're going to see Bellator 301? A couple of months ago, I would have said no. I think that a lot of people were looking at Bellator 300 like it was probably going to be the last card in their existence. And alas, Bellator 301 on November 17th is going down, and there's some really good fights on the card, just like with Bellator 300. So I thought it was a good idea to do our first Devil's Advocate video on a Bellator card. Now, of course, you've got Yaroslav Amosov. I believe he is the main event, his title defense. Arguing against Yaroslav Amosov is a difficult task after that performance against Logan Storley. So hence why we're not doing it. But to me, anyway, I think that there is a better matchup on this card, one that is more interesting, one that I am personally more excited for. I'm, of course, talking about the Bantamweight title unification fight between the champion Sergio Pettis and the interim champion and Grand Prix winner Patchy Mix. I think that I would have been disappointed if we didn't get to see this matchup before Bellator potentially got sold, because we don't know what's going to happen regarding that sale, whether things will stay the same but it'll be under a different name, whether some of the fighters will leave and stuff. And so I think that, you know, because we had the World Grand Prix tournament in the bantamweight division, which I think was fantastic, I loved a bunch of those matchups and a bunch of those fights. And I think that Patchy Mix, well, we'll get on to Patchy Mix in a minute, who is the favourite in this matchup, by the way, important that we are talking mostly about Sergio Pettis in this video, who is the world champion, I should remind you. But we needed to see this fight, I think, because the Grand Prix was such a success, and because I think Sergio Pettis is, I think a lot of people, since he's arrived in Bellator, have given him the credit that he deserved in the UFC. He's obviously, I think, had some of his best wins in Bellator, some of his best performances for sure. He still kind of feels like a bit of a hidden gem in Bellator, I think. I still don't think he really gets the credit he deserves. Like, we'll get onto it, but watching some of his recent fights in preparation for this video, I was like, man, people don't talk about Sergio Pettis enough. The guy is so good and so entertaining. As I mentioned, he isn't the favourite in this matchup, despite being the world champion. That goes to Patchy Mix. Let's talk about Patchy Mix for a second and why he is the favourite. Because at the end of the day, this video, if you haven't seen Devil's Advocate before, is me making an argument for the underdog in this fight, Sergio Pettis, and this isn't a overall breakdown of the fight, how I see it playing out. This is more pointing out why Sergio Pettis can win the fight despite being an underdog. But let's talk about the favourite first, Patchy Mix. Had an incredible run in the Bantamweight World Grand Prix. Of course, we knew that Patchy Mix was a very, very good submission specialist. Bunch of different submission threats that he has, and he proved that, but he also proved that he is far better than just that. Took out, he probably had the hardest run of anybody in the tournament. He fought Horiguchi, he fought Magomedov, and he fought Rafion Stotts in the final. And of course, that final against Stotts is kind of the thing that the crowning achievement, not only because it was the final and he won it, because he did it in the fashion he did, with the knee in the first round, a knockout on his record against Stotts, who I rate very, very highly. I think that the Grand Prix did a fantastic job of showing the talent that is in the bantamweight division, but also creating narratives. Of course, we had the Stotts and Sabatello stuff, and now we have Patchy and Stotts was fantastic as well, and now you have it all culminating with Patchy going on to take on Sergio Pettis. So let's talk about Sergio Pettis. And how this matchup, when you see them square off, which is the first thing I went to do, go watch when Sergio stepped into the cage, or Patchy stepped into the cage rather, for the face-off. And what do you notice immediately? You notice that Patchy Mix is a very, very big bantamweight. He's really tall for the weight class, very rangy. And Sergio Pettis is definitely on the smaller side of the bantamweight weight class. Of course, he used to fight at flyweight in the UFC, and Bellator at the time didn't have a flyweight division. They have a flyweight champion with Horiguchi. The most notable thing is the size, and your mind, if you were looking at that face-off, goes, Patchy Mix is a submission specialist. He's going to probably try and take Sergio Pettis down in this fight, and he is such a bigger man than Sergio Pettis. But I think that it is important how Sergio Pettis is used to this. And we'll talk about that more in his most recent fight when we dive more into that. But I think that fighting against bigger guys does kind of play into his style. He isn't a dominating fighter. Despite him having dominant performances, this kind of again ties into his last fight, which I think is one of the best performances of his career. Definitely one of his best wins. But I do think that size can play into his game. And that is because despite Patchy Mix being a very big threat grappling-wise and being a much bigger guy, so you would assume he can probably get him down at some point, Sergio Pettis fights at his best when he is the matador. And he is a fantastic matador. Largely down to his footwork, which is excellent, his speed, which he has over a lot of these guys, being a former flyweight, and because of it's just his natural skill set. It is his boxing, of course, we are going to get into, because I think Sergio Pettis' boxing is fantastic. It's one of the main things I drew from watching tape, and watching tape on Sergio Pettis. The first place to go was his most recent win over Patricio Pitbull, who of course moved down from the weight class above. So you've got a size comparison there, which Pitbull isn't. I would need to see Pitbull and Patchy mix next to each other, but I think Patchy's probably bigger in terms of height. Pitbull obviously fills out a lot more for that weight class, but the most notable thing in this fight is Sergio Pettis walked to the cage looking like a boxer. You know, he had like gold boxing shorts on, and he fought like a boxer. Obviously mixed in some kicks, but we'll get to the kicks in a minute. But he, of course, I think another big reason why he's an underdog in this fight, he came back after a year and a half away. And that is why he wasn't in the Bantamweight Grand Prix. Of course, he was meant to be originally, and then had to pull out, and so they put the interim title into the Grand Prix instead. And one of the reasons I say about Sergio Pettis being such a good matador, such a good counter-striker when people are coming at him, is because of the skill set that he has. And I think that you've seen this a lot in his Bellator run compared to his UFC run. His boxing is his fundamentals. He is so good with his hands, and he's so good at not overcommitting. Again, when we speak about a matador, he is fantastic at landing and doing damage without ever needing to overcommit. And that's always the big risk, I think, when you have a guy like Patchy Mix versus a smaller guy like Sergio Pettis, is like, how can he keep him at bay whilst his boxing is his best attribute, right? Because whilst he does have fantastic kicks, that again we will talk about in a minute, that's going to be difficult to use against a guy like Patchy Mix, because he's going to try and catch the kicks and take him down, or as soon as the striker opens up for a kick, he's going to close that distance and catch him off balance or something like that. But Sergio Pettis' boxing, as we saw in the Pitbull fight, is good enough to where he can win a 25-minute fight with his boxing alone, and the other guy, Pitbull, couldn't really get close to him. I know he took him down a few times, which is a little bit concerning, but he wasn't able to do any damage. Sergio was able to get back to his feet a lot of the time, and in the later rounds, he was able to stop those takedowns completely or scramble out of them. Again, the matador, he is so elusive, not only in his footwork and his boxing, but in takedowns as well. The kicks. Let's talk about the kicks. I think that the biggest difference between Sergio and his brother Anthony Pettis, both of them have incredibly flashy striking styles. They are both incredible at looking slick on the feet, but also, you know, throwing in those moments that make you jump out your seat and go, wait, what happened? Like, rewind it. What did I just miss? You know? And he caught Pitbull with a few of those, and they were fantastic. I think he hurt him with a spinning wheel kick at one point. His kicks are fantastic, but the thing that impressed me the most against Pitbull, and I think the thing that will stand him very well against Patchy Mix, is his shot selection. His timing of when to use them is fantastic. He knew that Pitbull would be trying to get the takedowns, and so he would only throw kicks in when he had the space to do so, and he only threw like those flashy kicks and things like that. Maybe like, I don't even know if there was one per round, right? And that's what I think is the most important thing when it comes to Sergio Pettis playing the counter-striker in this matchup and having the advantage there, is he's so efficient with it. I love Anthony Showtime Pettis, but sometimes I'd be watching him and getting frustrated. Like, it just fundamentals. Like, you need to win the fight first at the end of the day. And I think Sergio Pettis over time has gotten a lot better at doing that. And that's how you get a performance like the Pitbull fight, where he just kind of took Pitbull to school with his fundamentals on the feet. And Pitbull, of course, is a very, very dangerous striker. To go on to, I've already spoken about his takedown defense, which I think is obviously going to be a huge factor in this matchup. I think he probably will get taken down at some point. to me, it's about that elusiveness. It's about whether he can keep Patchy guessing. It's about whether he can scramble out of those positions. Because of course, if Patchy Mix is going to win this fight, a submission is going to be the most predicted outcome. The time of doing research on this video, there was no odds anywhere out online, and so instead I went off of the Tapology, you know, like the like fan vote fight predictions. So it currently has Patchy Mix 67%, Sergio Pettis 33%. Which, again, I've already outlined why I think that is, and I can understand that argument. Obviously, I'm not here to talk to you about why Patchy Mix is the favourite, but nonetheless. The other thing I think to look at, one of the fights that I specifically watched in depth to try and take some notes from was, of course, his fight with Koji Horiguchi, which was his last fight before his break and coming back against Pitbull. And of course, Horiguchi also fought Patchy Mix in their fight. Patchy Mix against Horiguchi was quite a close fight. I think that you talk about Sergio Pettis being small for the bantamweight weight class. Koji Horiguchi is very, very small for the weight class, and of course, his elusiveness and his explosiveness is some of his best attributes, and it's very difficult. If you watch how Horiguchi was successful against Pettis, you can see why he wouldn't be able to do that against Patchy Mix, because darting in and out and stuff, if Patchy Mix grabs a hold of you when you come in, you're in trouble. And so Patchy Mix was able to dominate a lot of the get a lot of ground control time in and win the fight that way. Against Sergio Pettis, Horiguchi caused Pettis a lot of problems, but problems that he certainly, I don't think, will face against Patchy Mix. And again, it was that elusiveness, that in and out, that bizarre timing, and also the some of the power on his shots as well. But this to me plays more into the stylistic matchup, because that time, Sergio Pettis was the one who had to walk down Horiguchi, and he just struggled to really pin him down. He did a really good job at some points of walking him down, but Horiguchi's just so fast and so explosive that it was like he was like the scene in Rocky where Rocky's trying to chase after the chicken. It was like he'd get close, but Horiguchi was coming in and out, and he was being really effective when he did come in and try and land strikes, because Sergio Pettis, one of the parts of Sergio Pettis' game that maybe is lacking is that that fear factor. He, of course, has fantastic kicks that are very dangerous, but if he can't set those up because you're constantly moving, or you can threaten a takedown or things like that, then, you know, he doesn't have that kind of one-punch knockout power or something that's going to maybe, you know, for a guy like Horiguchi, he seemed, you know, confident that he could come in and out without taking too much damage. But, you know, like I said, not that, you know, MMA math doesn't work, right? You can't say, oh, well, Sergio Pettis knocked out Horiguchi and Patchy Mix beat him by decision. So, because Sergio Pettis was definitely losing the fight against Horiguchi until he landed that incredible spinning back fist, the best finish of his career for sure, to win the fight. And the Horiguchi one, I don't think Horiguchi's going to be able to... Patchy Mix isn't going to be able to cause the same problems to Pettis that Horiguchi was able to. And the fight points out to me the most important thing about Sergio Pettis' game, which is he works far better as a counter-striker. And with Patchy Mix coming into this fight as the grappler in this matchup, I think both guys are pretty good everywhere, but Sergio Pettis definitely more of a striker. And we've seen more striking from Patchy Mix, but he's definitely still a grappler, a submission specialist, I should say, in terms of his best skill set and where he is going to win most of his fights in his career, as proven, really. In his great run with Bellator, where his only loss was to Juan Archuleta. Again, MMA math doesn't work, so I'm not counting that as a point, but I think that this matchup, though a grappling-heavy matchup for Sergio Pettis, is obviously less than ideal. You would definitely pick him against other strikers before picking him against other grapplers, right? But I do also think that some of the things he does well will play into this matchup in terms of being elusive, being a good counter-striker, but most importantly, I think, being able to win a fight without being flashy. I know that he did it against Horiguchi. Again, I've explained why the things that Horiguchi did, I don't think play into this fight. Like I said, if anything, I think it points out why Sergio Pettis is far better when opponents come to him and not the other way round. Sergio Pettis is fantastic at the thing you saw him do against Pitbull for 25 minutes. Can he do that to Patchy Mix? I don't think he can put on a performance to that level against Patchy Mix, because I just think Patchy Mix will be more competitive in this fight than Pitbull was against Pettis. But I do see a scenario where he can make it very difficult for Patchy Mix to take him down. He can force Patchy Mix to strike with him, and as we've seen, Sergio Pettis can do that kind of, that style of just landing a jab, landing a quick combination and getting out and doing it, rinse and repeat. We've seen he can do that all day long. And I think that could get very frustrating for Patchy Mix. I think this fight is fantastic. I am so excited for it. Like I said, huge fan of both Sergio Pettis and Patchy Mix. They have been incredible for Bellator through their runs with the promotion, and I can't believe we haven't seen them fight already. I'm excited for this matchup, excited for this event. Thank you for checking out this episode of Devil's Advocate. Hopefully I gave you some overview as to, despite Sergio Pettis being the underdog, why he can still win this fight in a tough stylistic matchup. Striker versus grappler, you know how it is. It really does come down to don't get taken down to some degree, but I think Sergio Pettis can do that whilst landing offense and keeping himself safe from being taken down and submitted. So good stuff. Like I said, thank you for checking out this episode of Devil's Advocate. Hit subscribe, drop a comment of what fights are coming up that you want to see us cover on this series, all that good stuff, and I'll see you on the next one. Enjoy the fights.